Well, what is a better buy today? Pre-owned cars or new ones? Today we're going to take a look. Stay tuned for Prudent Money. Good afternoon and welcome to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I'm your host, Bob Brooks. Thank you so much for joining me today. You know I do appreciate it. Well, with tariffs coming and some prices already feeling the brunt of tariff increases, where do you find your best buy? Well, today, Carl Brower, who's with iccars.com, is here to weigh in. Hey, Carl, welcome to the program.
Hey, great being on with you.
You know, I was just thinking here as we were getting ready for to do the program, that's a question with a lot of moving parts. Pre-owned car or a new one, and lots of dynamics. We'll jump into that though. But the question that I want to start with is from a scale from 0 to 100. 100 being we're seeing the full effects of tariffs, to 0 we are feeling no effects from tariffs. Where do you think we are? I mean, there's been a lot of confusion. There's been tariffs postponed, and it's just where do you think we are?
You know, it's a tough question because I don't think the tariffs are settled, right? When they're
Right.
bouncing around and undefined, how do you know what the final impact's going to be? And I would say a better way to think of it might be that how far are we through the process of figuring out what tariffs are going to be and where they're going to settle in? And I would think that we're somewhere between 25 and 50%. Like I'll be surprised if the tariff issue isn't pretty much resolved by, say, September or so, and maybe even August, July, or August next month or the following month. But I don't think the administration wants these continuing disruptions and uncertainties. Nobody likes them, especially the auto industry that operates on a 3, 5, 7 year timing horizon for new models and where they're going to build them and how they're going to price them. They just cannot have tariffs changing every few weeks or even every month when they have to operate at that kind of scale.
Well, it'll be interesting. That's one thing for sure, and I guess the old saying about prepare for the unexpected is going to be the issue of the day. You know, once we start to see this effect of prices, do you see the car manufacturers passing that tariff cost off to the customer, or do you see a balance where they maybe absorb part of the hit and pass on some of the cost?
I think we'll see multiple factors that'll be impacted and how they'll kind of spread them out. I think we'll absolutely see prices go up. There'll be some consumer absorption, but they'll probably also absorb a little bit internally, like within the manufacturer, and they'll probably renegotiate or talk to their suppliers and see if they can get some help on that side too. So how that final breakout occurs will be tough to define, but if you just started assuming maybe a 30% for each of those three, I think you'd probably not be too far off. I just heard rumblings that, for instance, Porsche is going to raise all their prices 9% across the board, as an example. So.
As if those entry-level cars, and even on the entry-level side, is so unbelievably high.
Yeah, I know, as if Porsches don't already cost a lot of money.
That's right. So, go figure. Well, let's talk a little bit about, if this is even a word, the best value today between, what do you think it is between maybe new cars, 1 to 2 year old cars, kind of that segment, or the just broader pre-owned cars market?
I personally feel like, more than 3 to 5 year old cars, like 3 to 5 at the minimum and even older potentially, are really where you're going to get some value. That's what you see a lot of in my fleet. That's my personal fleet here, between what I've got and my family's driving and what I've bought for them. It's hugely dependent, of course, on a pre-purchase inspection and just basically making sure you're getting a good used car, one that has not been abused or has a nasty history or an accident history and all. And there's all the resources you've got out there, VIN reports like iCars has that can tell you a lot about a car's past, combined with things like Carfaxes and maybe a little bit of due diligence as far as looking at for flood and theft or damage and all that kind of stuff. But if you can verify an older used car's history as clean and unabused, plus a pre-purchase inspection to confirm what you're seeing today on the car. The fact is that we see cars lasting longer and longer. IC
right.
Cars has the annual longest lasting study. We used to try to predict how likely it was for a given model to get to 200,000 miles. Now we've bumped it to 250 because so many of the cars were getting to 200. And you know this, Bob, from not that long ago. At 100,000 miles, the car was considered pretty much used up. It wasn't that long ago.
Right, right.
But now, 100,000 plus. So the trick is, and I've got several examples in my own fleet here, of 100 plus thousand mile cars going strong. So I really do feel like, if you don't want to, if you feel more comfortable getting a newer car, you're still usually better off buying like a 1 to 3 year old car. That's where the most depreciation happens. If you can get a CPO, certified pre-owned, one of those with a new car like warranty, that's even better. You're going to pay more for that. But I do feel like there's just a wealth of older cars, 5 to like 15-year-old cars, that if you can do your due diligence on their quality and condition and history, you can end up with an extremely low-cost vehicle that should be relatively trouble-free and operate for years.
I'll tell you this story. My wife yesterday, we were talking about the boys. I have a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old. And my oldest, Sherry goes, "Can you believe that he's got 80,000 miles on that car?" And as if we're about to have to put this car out to pasture. But I do remember that as a kid. Once it hit 100,000 miles, it was toast. I mean, you
Right.
just you started looking for something else. Now, you mentioned a second ago, and I saw this. I meant to go back and look at it, but wanted to tell us a little bit about this VIN report, because I think this is new, isn't it?
It is. I think IC Cars has had it for a while, but they keep refining it, and it just keeps getting better and better. And now you've got this VIN report that we can produce, and you just put in the car's vehicle identification number, easily found under the windshield on the driver's side of the dash, looking through the windshield, or in the driver's door jamb is the two most common places. And they've been a standardized 17-digit VIN since 1981. And you put that in, and the VIN report is really unlike anything I've seen anyone else offer that IC Cars has, with this just depth of information. All the history of the vehicle's pricing, the sales, its current market value, and then all the links to associated sources that can help you determine, like I said, its accident history, its flood history, its salvage or theft history. It's essentially like a handhold guide to checking out the car's entire history before you buy it.
So are we seeing an inventory issue with new cars?
This is interesting because what we saw was that the tariffs, as you mentioned, kind of caused a bit of a panic in the car buyer world, and people were like, before these tariffs hit, I better go get something. So there was absolutely more demand in the last 2 months, March and April, and into May, for people to want to go out and buy a car before the prices went up, new and used. And that caused what you're talking about is probably a bit of a supply issue versus demand, and some pricing that went up that I saw in our monthly reports that I get to see at IC Cars. But overall, I think we're still in pretty good shape. We're slowly getting through, especially on the new side. You said new cars, and I think new cars generally, they were going for over MSRP for years with the COVID
right.
situation, and they're getting back to almost MSRP. I'm looking at the report right here. They came down 0.5% last month, year over year. The average price right now is $46,873. The average price a year ago was $46,831. So almost identical, within literally $42 of the same price they were a year ago. So we're not seeing this ongoing creep in new car prices. They've kind of stabilized. Used cars, because people are, first of all, used cars are usually 3 to 5 years old. 3 to 5 years ago, that's when the new car production was cut from COVID.
That's
and
true.
Plants being shut down. So there were just fewer cars produced in like the late part of 2020 into like 2022. And now that those are 3 to 5 year old cars, we're seeing fewer of those that were ever produced. And a lot of the lease people from that time frame who are coming up on their leases now. They look around at what a new car would cost them or another lease car, and they decide that they're getting a great deal to buy their lease car, and they buy it, and that car doesn't go into the used car marketplace, further restricting used car supply. So we're still seeing a bit of a used car restriction, and it's perfect timing because this week we're releasing our latest used car pricing report showing that for the last 3 months in a row, used car transaction prices have been going up.
So, do you think, and whether we agree with it or not, but the reaction from buyers, do you think that they're taking the side of, well, let's just wait and see what pans out, or do you think people you're seeing even more of the ongoing of a sense of urgency?
Like most situations in the consumer world, it's not a monolithic thing. We're seeing both. There was certainly a segment that decided we better get ahead of this tariff thing, and that caused higher demand in prices in new and used cars the last couple of months. And I think the new car might back off, but I think the used car, it might be an ongoing issue because there's a supply side there as much as anything. But you've also got people who are holding, saying, I'm not going to go near that, especially if their car is fine right now. And that's always what I try to tell people is, you should never feel pressured into buying a car. That's the worst circumstance to buy a car under because the dealers will take advantage of that. They'll charge more, and if you feel like you can't avoid buying a car now, you buy it anyways and all that. So you should always do your due diligence, have lots of information before you buy, and you should never try to feel pressured to buy a car.
One of the things that I like about iSeeCars.com is really twofold. First, it's a research-based website that you can go and get just unbelievable amounts of information and research on a car that you might be looking to buy. And the other is, and I know you see this, Carl, if you go to your competition, you don't get the feeling that this is customer focused. And at iSeeCars.com, that's what you get, is that feeling that they're there to provide what you're not reading on the other sites, what you're not getting research-wise. I would think that today it's more important than ever to do that research and to really not rely on the sales experience when you go into the dealership, but be prepared with a lot of information so that you do make the right choice, especially today.
100%, and keep in mind that now you've got that option, right? Like for most of the history of the automobile and automotive retailing, it was hard for consumers to know what all that information was. They didn't know the invoice price. They were kind of at the mercy of the dealer and the sales experience that you just described. Now it's out there and you can get access to it, and there's a lot of sources of information, so you can feel a little overwhelmed just trying to do the research. But iSeeCars leadership has 100% taken the position of, an advocate for the consumer and for the buyer. That's their primary role. And I've been at a lot of big name sites, and I think they've done it more extensively and are more aggressive on being on the consumer side than anywhere else I've worked. And everything we've talked about already, the VIN report, you can also get free window stickers using a VIN through iSeeCars and their affiliates and all. And there's the filtration system when you're researching a car. You can decide everything from the price range to the fuel economy you need to the type of body style you're wanting to the distance you're willing to go. A lot of times you can get a better deal if you're willing to go 50 or 100 miles away from your home zip code instead of only 20 miles. And I always tell people, it's like, look, if it takes you a day to go get a car and you consider your value $100 or $200 an hour even, and it took you 8 hours to get the car, then that's somewhere between $800 and $1,600. But you saved $3,000 or $4,000 buying the car because you were willing to either fly or drive to another location to get it. You're still making out well. So all those things can be incorporated into the research and experience at iSeeCars.
Okay, so y'all came up with, and I love the articles that y'all place on the site, the top 10 best times to buy a used car. And I thought it was really interesting. So talk a little bit about some of these dates. I sort of kind of get the New Year's Eve and the New Year's Day. People, car dealerships are trying to make their numbers, I guess.
Yep. Yeah, that's a big one. So, it sounds stereotypical, but it's honestly true. If you're at the end of December, you're at the end of the fourth quarter. There's 4 quarters in each year. You're at the end of that fourth quarter. You're at the end of the calendar year, and of course, you're at the end of the month. So all those things are coming due on December 31st. And as you said, the car companies and the car dealerships love to make their numbers on the sales and the revenue that's coming in. So if you can, otherwise time it and it works for you, again, you should never buy a car when you're not ready to or it doesn't work for you. But if you can line up when it makes sense for you to buy a car with December 31st, and it doesn't have to be the 31st, it could be like the 30th or the 29th. But if you're getting close to the end of the year and you can time your purchase there, whether it's people spending all their time and money on gifts and don't have a lot of extra money left over, whether it's the cold weather that keeps a lot of people from going to a dealership at that time of year in parts of the country. If that time frame works for you right at the end of December, you should be able to negotiate that much more aggressively. That's the number one day. And you've got the list here before you. You can see a lot of those same things play in. The weather is a big deal. So MLK Day is the second best day. The month of January in general, because again, cold. A lot of people are coming off their holiday spending hangover. They don't have money for cars. President's Day, Christmas Eve. These are all in the top part of buying. December, February. These are all the top times to buy a car. And then, not surprisingly, the opposite time of the year. Father's Day, 4th of July, month of June in general, Memorial Day, Juneteenth. These are all the worst times to buy. You're right at the height of the car buying season. Car dealers know that if you're in there and you're trying to negotiate, there's probably a line of people behind you, and they're like, if you don't want to pay for this car, we're pretty confident someone else will pay this price for this car. That's their attitude.
So in the spirit of Father's Day, that's the number one worst time to buy a used car. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, there's just, you have everything going on in June, from the weather being good across the nation, so people being more willing to go out and spend time outside at a dealership and test driving cars, to people wanting to maybe do a vacation, road trips. People it's summertime and they're thinking it's family vacation time, or maybe they're single or they're a couple and it's go out for a cruise across the country or tour a state or something. They want to go on a fun driving vacation. And the weather inspires this kind of thinking, and especially at the beginning of the summer, which is Father's Day. You've got all 3 months ahead of you, even in the cold weather areas. So yeah, Father's Day is a great holiday, but it comes up using the pure data that we always are using. Remember, this is all based on studying the data, looking at transaction prices for used cars, and Father's Day is the worst time to buy a used car.
Go figure. I would have never guessed that one. So one thing that I have always heard is that the best time of the month, and it kind of fits in with this list, but my question is, wouldn't you have like 12 best days to buy a car if you're talking about buying it at the end of each month? That last day of the month is a great time.
Yeah, but it's always going to be relative to the rest of the time of the year, right? Like if June is in general isn't a very good month to buy a car,
right.
But if you have to buy in June, the best day within June is going to be toward the end, because again, you're coming up to the end of the month, and so no matter what month it is, within that given month, the last day of the month will be when the dealer's closing its books on all of its numbers and trying to make numbers, and same with the manufacturer. And a lot of times that's also when incentives, there'll often be incentives driving car sales, and they'll often expire at the end of a given month.
Dealerships are advertising that they're paying top dollar for trade-ins. How accurate is that claim?
They are. You always have to remember that trading in your car is the way to essentially get the least amount of money for it. The dealership a dealer has to get a car at a price they can sell it for a profit. So if you're selling to a dealer, you're selling to someone who's not the end buyer of the car. They're the middleman trying to find the next buyer and make a profit on it. So they have to get it from you at a price that they can sell it for more to the next buyer. Whereas if you sell to a private individual, they're buying the car because they want the car. They aren't looking to flip it for profit. Some probably are, and you can sometimes spot those. But generally speaking, you want to sell to a private individual. That's the best way to get your money out of your car, is to sell to a private individual. Now, it requires putting an ad and taking photos and dealing with buyers. And a lot of people don't want to do that, and a dealer knows that, and that's why there's plenty of people who trade their car in, and the dealer's happy to take those vehicles in. The other thing that's tricky about trade-ins, remember too, is that if you're trading it in as part of a purchase of a new car, you just got to be careful, because I'll just make these numbers up, but let's say that the car that you want to buy you think is a good deal at $30,000. Like, it is a good deal. You've done your research on IC cars, you know the market price, and the car is a $30,000 car. And then the dealer's going to say, do you have a trade-in? And you're going to say, well, yeah, I guess so. And then they're going to be like, oh, okay, well, we'll give you $8,000 for your trade-in. Well, maybe your trade-in is really worth 10 or 12, either to a private individual or another dealer. So, but if you give it to them for 8 and you come up with another 22, you technically got the car for 30, but you really got the car for 32 or 34. If you could have gotten it'd
Sure.
be as if you got the car for 32 or 34 if you could have gotten another 2 or 4 out of your trade-in, but you went with the dealer that you were buying the car at. So one of the things I always do, not that dealers are ever deceptive, but as a buyer at a dealership, I often come up with first you come up with the value that you're going to pay for the car, and you don't mention there. Oh, do you have a trade-in and all? No, I don't want a trade-in right now. And you negotiate to the exact price you're going to pay for the car. Then, at that point, you say, oh, you know what? Now that we've got the price looked in, I guess I would be interested in trading my car in. And everything's going to be based off that initially negotiated price that you've now locked in. So if it's $30,000 or $25,000, and then if you know the value of your car, and you want to let the dealer pay, they do have to pay their bills and keep the lights on, so you're not going to get retail for your trade-in. But if you know that retail for your car is 10, and you say, look, I know you need to make money, you got to recondition it, advertise it, and all that, I'll let it go for 9 or 85, and the $1,500 I'm saving saves me the hassle of selling it myself. Then you negotiate those separately. You don't let them roll the trade in with the negotiations for price and payment and all, because then you're never going to really know what you got for your car.
Question that I've had, I've always wondered, is you have a dealership like CarMax who will buy the car, they'll value it and buy the car, and I guess you lose all that tax credit, don't you? If you're going to trade it in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it just depends on how you're structuring the deal and how much the car you paid for the car versus what you let the car go for and all, right? Because, I mean, if you can confirm that the car was a loss when you bought and sold to a private individual, that might help you better on taxes, especially if it's a business-related car for your own business, than trading it in where it might get lost in the transaction for the new car.
iSeeCars.com is the website, and go check it out. A lot of free information there, a lot of great research. Carl, I always appreciate you coming on the program.
Great talking to you, Bob. Always fun talking cars, and let me know if we can do it again.
Absolutely. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. I got to tell you, if you are in the market for a car, research is so very important, and there's just so much to look at and understand. But, what ends up happening is people, I truly believe this, people kind of wander in off the street, go to the car dealership. They know they're in a situation where they'll probably be buying a car within the month or 2 months. And the biggest mistake that they make is they do no homework, no setting up finance ahead of time. They just walk into the dealership, and then it turns into an emotional buy. And then they kind of get talked into, well, you don't really need to get the car checked out. Our mechanics have checked that car off and done a 600-point inspection or whatever it is. And you start making some questionable decisions that could really end up being expensive decisions. And why iSeeCars.com, there's quite a few of the big websites out there that have free information. And besides that, getting the car checked out is just imperative today. I went through this process not too long ago and could not believe the car looks perfectly fine on the outside. And but when you started looking in around the engine and brakes, and it was just unbelievable. I think it ended up being $5,000 or $6,000 of maintenance work that had to be done to the car. And I wouldn't have known it had I not had it checked out. So just be careful. I think that's the point. I like having Carl along. He has such great information. Once again, that's iSeeCars.com. This is Bob Brooks, and you are listening to the Prudent Money Radio Show. If you have a question for me, please go to the website, prudentmoney.com, and send it in, because we are all out of time. Till we do meet again next time, keep the faith and have a great rest of the day.
That's all the time we have for today. Questions or comments for Bob, or to find out more great information like what you've just heard, visit www.prudentmoney.com. Be sure to join Bob Brooks again for the next edition of Prudent Money.
Prudent Money with Bob Brooks is sponsored by the Prudent Money Foundation on 91.3.